The ballroom smelled faintly of roses and expensive champagne. Crystal chandeliers hung like frozen waterfalls, scattering light across the polished marble floor. Everything looked like a scene from a magazine, the kind of wedding I once dreamed my son would have. Every table was dressed in white linen and gold trim, every chair wrapped with satin bows. Guests in shimmering dresses and sharp suits milled about, laughing softly over clinking glasses. A string quartet played in the corner, their bows sweeping across the strings in perfect unison. It was a night meant for joy, for beginnings. I sat in the second row of the front section, my hands folded neatly in my lap. My navy blue gown, chosen carefully so as not to outshine the bride, draped to the floor. I had gone to the salon early that morning for a soft updo, with a pearl comb tucked into my hair. I had wanted to look like the mother of the groom, proud and dignified. I had wanted to be seen, to be recognized for the years I had poured into raising my only son after his father passed away. The ceremony had gone beautifully. My son, Daniel, had looked every bit the man I had raised, tall, confident, with his father's gentle eyes. When the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, I felt tears rise, warm and uncontainable. I clapped until my palms ached, smiling so wide my cheeks hurt. It wasn't until later, during the reception, that the air changed for me. I had gone up to the head table to congratulate the newlyweds once more, thinking I might sneak in a brief, quiet moment with my son before the whirlwind of speeches and dancing began. The bride, Cassandra, turned toward me with a dazzling smile, her white gown catching the light like a prism. She leaned in, her voice soft enough that only I could hear. "You know," she said, her words coated in something that felt too sweet to be genuine, "people have been asking who you are. I told them you were his late father's ex. I hope you don't mind." Her perfume hit me before the meaning of her words did. A floral scent that turned suddenly sharp in my throat. I blinked. "His father's ex." My voice was barely above a whisper. She tilted her head as if amused. "Well, you know, it just seemed easier to explain than all that messy history. I mean, technically you were married to him right before." She let the sentence trail into the air like smoke. Before the car accident that took my husband. Before the years I spent holding my son through every night terror. Before the double shifts I worked so Daniel could have everything he needed. Before I aged too quickly from the strain of being everything for him. I straightened my shoulders. "I am Daniel's mother," I said, my voice sharper now. Her smile didn't falter. "Of course, I didn't mean anything by it. People just get confused. You don't look much alike, and, well, it's simpler this way." She touched my arm lightly, the way one might pat the back of a stranger in passing. And then she turned to greet another guest. I stood there, my body stiff, my hands trembling, all around me. Laughter floated through the air, the music swelled, and cameras flashed. But I felt as though I had stepped into a shadowed corner no one else could see. I didn't remember walking back to my table. I didn't remember sitting down, my plate sad and touched before me, the salmon cooling, the asparagus wilting. My mind kept circling back to those words. His late father's ex, as if they were a shard of glass lodged in my chest. I had been called many things over the years. Widow, single mother, teacher, friend. But never had someone tried to erase my place in my son's life with such casual precision. It wasn't just the words themselves. It was the way she said them. The way she reduced me to an outdated footnote in Daniel's story. As if I were some temporary character who had long since exited the stage. The speeches began. Daniel's best man told stories about college pranks. Cassandra's maid of honor spoke about their late-night study sessions in law school. Laughter filled the room, glasses clinked in toasts. I clapped and smiled where appropriate, but inside, I was unraveling. When Daniel took the microphone to thank everyone, his eyes swept over the room, landing on me for just a heartbeat before moving on. "We're so lucky to have all of you here," he said, "especially our parents, who shaped us into the people we are today." Parents, plural, but his father was gone, and the only other parent in the room was me. Still, the way he said it made me feel like I had been blended into some vague category rather than recognized as the single constant in his life. I thought about the years when we had almost nothing, the winters when I skipped dinner so Daniel could have a second helping, the nights when I sewed buttons back onto his only school sweater by the dim light of a bedside lamp. I thought about how I had sat in hospital waiting rooms when he broke his arm at 12, How I had cheered in the stands at every basketball game even when he barely played, and now, on the most important day of his life, the woman he chose to marry had introduced me to others as though I were a relic from his father's past. The music swelled again, this time for the couple's first dance. I watched them move across the floor, their bodies close, faces glowing under the lights. Round me, guests murmured about how perfect they looked together. How this was the start of something beautiful, but for me, something had ended. I could not name it yet, but I felt its absence like a cold draft against my skin. I sat in silence, my fork untouched, my heart thudding against my ribs. I wondered if Daniel knew what Cassandra had said to me. I wondered if he would care. Somewhere deep inside, a question took root, a dangerous, bitter seed. If this is how they see me now, what place will I have in his life tomorrow? The reception hall was all glitter and glass. Crystal chandeliers sent beams of light across the polished floor, and the scent of roses and gardenias filled the air everywhere I turned. People were smiling, laughing, clinking champagne glasses. It should have been a celebration I had waited my whole life for. My only son, James, married to the woman he claimed was the love of his life. But the echo of her voice still rang in my ears. His late father's ex. The words she had used during the introductions just hours ago cut deeper than she could possibly understand. She had said them with a polite smile, a hand resting lightly on James' arm as if she were delivering some casual, factual remark. But it wasn't casual. It was a dismissal. It was the stripping away of my very identity in front of strangers. I tried to focus on the live band's soft jazz, on the clinking of silverware, on the laughter that should have felt like joy. Yet, all I could feel was the heat in my chest. That slow, steady burn that comes when someone has crossed a line you didn't even know you had to protect. I had raised James alone. When his father died, James was just 7 years old. I worked 2 jobs, packed school lunches, stood in the rain for every soccer match, and stayed up all night when he was sick. I was his anchor when the world felt like it was drifting away from us. I was the one who held him through his nightmares when grief came crashing down like waves. And yet, here I was, reduced to some historical footnote, an ex of a man who had been gone for over 2 decades. I glanced at James across the room. He looked so happy, laughing with a group of his groomsmen. His bride, Victoria, stood beside him in a gown that shimmered with every turn. She carried herself like a woman who believed she belonged in every room, and perhaps she did, but the way she had introduced me told me exactly where she thought I belonged. Nowhere near the center of her new life. A part of me wanted to storm over, take her by the arm, and demand an explanation. Another part of me wanted to slip out quietly, let them have their perfect wedding day without my presence staining the photographs. But then I thought of my own wedding day. The lace veil my mother had sewn by hand, the look in my husband's eyes when he promised me forever, the way we danced until my feet ached, laughing until my cheeks hurt. Those memories were mine. And they were part of James' story too, even if his new wife wanted to erase them. I took a slow sip of champagne and reminded myself, I was not here for her. I was here for James. I had promised myself I would smile, clap, and stand tall through every moment of this day, no matter how much it hurt. Dinner began. Plates of roasted duck, asparagus, and herbed potatoes were placed in front of us. I found myself seated at the far end of the long family table, next to an elderly aunt from the groom's side whom I barely knew. Across the table, Victoria's parents sat like royalty, basking in every compliment and every laugh from the guests around them. I noticed how Victoria leaned close to her mother, whispering and smiling in a way she had never once done with me. Halfway through the meal, I overheard one of the bridesmaids ask Victoria about me. "Oh, that's just James' father's ex," Victoria replied without hesitation, her voice carrying just far enough for me to hear. "She's around, but they're not that close." My fork froze midair. Not that close. I had given my life to this boy, no, this man. Every sacrifice, every sleepless night, every ounce of love I had poured into him was being erased by a woman who had known him for a fraction of the time. I looked to James, hoping for some sign that he would correct her, that he would stand up for me, but he didn't hear it. He was laughing with one of his friends, unaware that a quiet war was being waged at the very table where we sat. I felt my jaw tighten. I told myself to breathe, to let it pass, to keep the peace for the sake of the day. But inside, something shifted. It wasn't anger, not entirely, it was resolve. As the speeches began, I sat back and listened to Victoria's father talk about how proud they were to welcome James into their loving, close-knit family. He spoke of their traditions, their values, their future. Not once did he mention the woman who had raised James to be the man they now so proudly claimed as their own. When it was my turn to speak, I stood slowly, holding my champagne glass. Every eye turned toward me, my heart pounded, but my voice was steady. I've had the privilege, I began, of watching James grow from a curious, mischievous little boy into the man he is today. I've seen him take his first steps, lose his first tooth, score his first goal, and survive his first heartbreak. I've seen the courage it takes to keep moving forward after loss, and the kindness it takes to love without fear. I let my gaze settle on James. You have always been my greatest joy, James, and today, as I see you start this new chapter, I want you to know, no matter what, you are my son, you always will be. I didn't look at Victoria when I sat down. I didn't need to. I could feel the shift in the air. She knew I had heard her. She knew I wasn't going to vanish quietly into the shadows. The rest of the night passed in a blur of music and dancing. I stayed until the last toast was made, until the last photograph was taken. But as I left the hall and stepped into the cool night air, I knew something had changed forever. This wasn't just about a careless remark at a wedding. This was about a line being drawn, and I had just decided I wasn't going to let anyone erase me from my own son's life. The wedding reception was in full swing by the time I made my way to the edge of the dance floor. The golden glow of the chandeliers made everything shimmer, but to me, it felt like a harsh spotlight on the cracks that had already formed in the evening. My heels clicked softly on the polished floor, but I kept to the edges, avoiding the swirling dresses and the clinking champagne glasses. The bride was radiant, I will not deny her that. Her lace gown hugged her figure in a way that made her look like she had stepped out of a magazine cover. But beauty, I have learned, can be the most deceptive of masks. She laughed at something one of her bridesmaids said, tossing her hair back, in that effortless way of the young, and I felt a pang not of jealousy, but of something deeper, displacement. My son Daniel had barely looked at me since the ceremony. The few times his eyes met mine, there was an awkwardness there, as though he had been told something that made him unsure how to speak to me, and I could guess what it was. That introduction, the cruel, calculated rebranding of me as his late father's ex, was not just a slip of the tongue, it was a statement, and like all statements, it had an intended audience. I sat at the far table, near the older relatives, most of whom I hadn't seen in years. Aunt Marjorie, who had always been quick to gossip, leaned toward me and whispered, "Well, I suppose that explains why you're sitting over here instead of up front." She gave me a knowing look, the kind people give when they think they have just uncovered a scandal. I smiled politely, though inside, my chest tightened. "What exactly does that explain, Marjorie?" I asked. She blinked, caught off guard. "Well, dear, I just thought since the bride said what she said that perhaps you and Daniel's father, well, that you weren't together when," her voice trailed off, "when he was alive." I finished for her. She nodded, embarrassed now. I reached for my water glass, my hand steady despite the storm brewing inside me. "Marjorie," I said evenly, "I was married to Robert until the day he died. There was never a divorce, never another woman, and there was certainly no reason for anyone to call me his ex-wife." Her eyes widened, and she sat back, clearly realizing she had stumbled into something she didn't understand. But that was the problem, wasn't it? The damage was already done. Words, once spoken, cannot be gathered back into the mouth. They scatter like feathers in the wind, carried off to corners you can never reach. I excused myself from the table and walked toward the powder room, not because I needed it, but because I needed a moment to breathe. As I entered the hallway, I caught sight of the bride, Lily, standing near the coat check with two of her friends. They were laughing in that conspiratorial way that women do when they are sharing something they find deliciously cruel. I stopped just before the corner, hidden from view but able to hear. "She looked so shocked," Lily was saying, "like she really thought she was going to be treated like the Queen Mother or something. Please, she's lucky I even let her come after the things Daniel told me." My breath caught. "What things?" One of her friends, a tall brunette with a sharp chin, said. "So she's really just your father-in-law's ex-wife." Not Daniel's mom, Lily snorted. Oh. She gave birth to him, sure, but she was apparently absent. Robert raised him. She was barely in the picture, always working, always off doing her own thing, at least. That's what Daniel told me. The air around me seemed to thin. I gripped the wall for balance. Daniel had said that my Daniel, the boy whose scraped knees I had kissed, whose fevers I had sat beside all night, whose college tuition I had paid with my own careful savings. I pressed a hand to my chest, steadying myself. Her other friend asked, "Then why invite her at all?" Lily shrugged. "Appearances. It would look bad not to, but believe me, I've made sure she knows her place. She's not part of this family anymore." The words landed like blows. Not part of this family anymore. I turned and walked back toward the reception hall, my steps slower this time. The world around me felt muted, the music a distant hum, the laughter like it came from another planet. When I reached my table, I noticed my place card had been moved slightly to the far end, as though to make more space for the others. Even the centerpiece, a low arrangement of white roses, seemed to lean away from me. Dinner was served. Plates of roasted lamb and glazed carrots were set before us. And I found I could barely taste a bite. The room was spinning with fragments of conversations, but my ears were tuned only to Daniel's voice. He was at the head table, laughing at something Lily said, his arm draped around her chair. He looked happy, and that perhaps was the worst part. When the speeches began, I braced myself. Lily's father went first, speaking warmly of his daughter's childhood, of her determination and grace. Then Daniel's best friend spoke, a mix of humor and sentiment. And finally, Daniel stood to speak. He thanked everyone for coming, for supporting them, for celebrating their love. He thanked Lily's parents for raising such a wonderful woman, and then he said, "I want to thank my father, Robert, for showing me what it means to be a real man." There was no mention of me, not even a passing acknowledgement. The applause was loud, but inside, I felt hollow. I did not cry then. Not yet. There would be time for that later. For now, I simply sat, my hands folded in my lap, my gaze steady on the flickering candles before me. The thing about pain is that it can be quiet. It does not always announce itself with sobs or broken voices. Sometimes it sits in your chest like a stone, heavy and unmoving. As the night wore on, I watched as Daniel and Lily danced, as guests toasted, as the music grew louder, and I made a promise to myself one I had never imagined making before. I would not fight for a place in their lives anymore. If they wished to push me out, I would step away, not because I was weak, but because I knew my worth, and one day, they would, and when that day came, they would remember the night they tried to erase me, and they would know exactly what they had lost. They had lost. The reception hall was a swirl of gold lights and laughter, the kind that clinked against champagne flutes and echoed off crystal chandeliers. On the surface, it was beautiful. A magazine-perfect celebration, but my seat at the far end of the hall was proof that beauty can be cruelly staged. They had placed me at a table with distant acquaintances, people who barely knew me, and had probably been invited out of politeness. My son was nowhere near me. The bridal table gleamed in the center like a stage, but my place was so far from it. I could have been a prop no one remembered to remove. I sipped water, my lipstick marking the glass, trying to keep my hands steady. I had been called many things in my life, stubborn, too giving, even foolish for believing in family, but never had I been stripped of my very identity the way she did when she called me his late fat. Hers ex, not mother, not parent, just an ex, as if my years of raising him were a footnote in someone else's story. When the music softened and the microphone was brought out for speeches, I expected nothing. I had been told earlier in the week that the speeches would be handled. That word, handled, still stung, but then, a small accident happened. The best man, nervous and fidgety, dropped his champagne flute, shattering it into a dozen pieces as the waitstaff cleaned it up. There was a gap, a pause in the evening's flow, and somehow, the microphone ended up on my table. I could have handed it over. I could have smiled politely and let the program continue, but I didn't. Something deep inside, the part of me that had rocked my son to sleep during thunderstorms, that had worked double shifts to pay for his school trips, that had believed I would always have a place in his life, rose to the surface. I stood, chairs turned, whispers followed. I took the microphone in my hand and walked toward the center of the room. my heels clicking against the polished floor. My heart was pounding so hard it felt like everyone could hear it. But my voice was steady when I began. I was not on the program tonight, I said, my eyes sweeping the room. But I suppose I've never been on the program for much of this wedding. A quiet ripple moved through the guests. My son shifted in his seat. His bride's face tightened. Some of you may know me as the late father's ex-wife. That's the title I was given earlier today. But that's not who I am. I am the woman who raised the man sitting before you. I am the person who held his hand on his first day of school. I am the one who kept the lights on when his father couldn't. I am his mother. The room had gone utterly still. Only the faint hum of the air conditioning filled the pause. I saw the groom, my son, swallow hard. I saw his bride place her hand over his, perhaps a silent warning, but I continued. When a mother loves her child, she loves them without asking for a stage or applause. But love does not make her invisible. I have been quiet this week, thinking maybe my presence was enough. That maybe showing up, smiling, and keeping my place at the edge of the room would be what my son wanted. But tonight, hearing myself reduced to someone's ex, I realized something. Silence lets others write your story. I turned then, my voice softening but carrying an unshakable weight, and I will not let anyone else write mine. Somewhere in the back, someone clapped. It was hesitant, uncertain. Then another, and another. A small ripple of applause moved through the room. But I didn't care about that. I was looking at my son. His expression was a battlefield: love, embarrassment, loyalty, shame, all colliding in the space between us. I wondered if he was seeing me for the first time that week, or if I was losing him forever. I handed the microphone back to the coordinator and walked away before anyone could stop me. My hands were trembling when I returned to my seat, but there was a strange steadiness in my chest. For the first time that day, I felt like myself again. Dinner resumed, but the air had shifted. Conversations were quieter near the bridal table. I caught glances from people who suddenly seemed unsure of what they knew. A few came over during the meal, distant cousins, an old friend of the family, and squeezed my hand, telling me they were glad I spoke, but not my son, not yet. I stayed until the first dance was over, watching him spin his bride beneath the glittering lights, his face lit with joy that didn't quite reach his eyes. Then, without saying goodbye, I gathered my things, walked out into the cool night air, and let the door close behind me. I didn't know it then, but my absence would be noticed far more than my presence ever was. And that night would become the line in the sand neither of us could ignore. The days following my departure from the wedding venue were heavy, but not with anger anymore. I had already bled all my fury in that reception hall, my words sharp enough to leave a mark. What remained was something quieter, heavier, a fatigue in my bones and a hollow ache in my chest. I moved through my days slowly, each task deliberate, as though I needed to steady myself before the next. It was 3 days later when I found the envelope in my mailbox, thick, cream-colored stationery, my name written in looping cursive. The handwriting wasn't Michael's, nor was it Emma's. I stood in my small kitchen, the winter sunlight filtering weakly through the blinds, and studied it for a long moment. I knew before opening it that it was from someone connected to that day. The ink, the choice of paper, the way my name was written all spoke of a formal hand. When I finally tore it open, the first thing I noticed was the crest at the top of the page, a golden, embossed emblem I didn't recognize. Below it, the words were polite, almost apologetic. Mrs. Turner, I would like to invite you to tea this coming Thursday. It is important we speak privately. Margaret Ellison. I knew the name. Margaret Ellison was Emma's grandmother. I had seen her once at the wedding, a regal woman in her late 70s. Her posture impossibly straight, her silver hair swept into a chignon. I remembered her watching me from across the reception hall when Emma made her little introduction. His late father's ex. Margaret's eyes had narrowed then, though she hadn't approached me. Now she wanted to meet. My first instinct was to ignore it. Nothing good could come from meeting anyone from that side of the family, not after the humiliation I'd endured. But something in me, perhaps stubbornness, perhaps the faintest glimmer of curiosity, wouldn't allow me to crumple the letter and throw it away. Thursday came, and I found myself standing outside a grand Victorian home that looked like it had been plucked from a painting. Its ivy-covered walls and ornate wrought iron gate made me feel instantly out of place. The butler who answered the door ushered me inside with a practiced formality, leading me into a sunlit sitting room where Margaret sat waiting. She did not rise to greet me. Instead, she regarded me with the kind of cool appraisal that could cut a person in half without a word. But when she finally spoke, her voice was softer than I expected. "I owe you an apology," she said, pouring tea into delicate china cups without waiting for my response. I sat across from her, my back straight, my hands folded tightly in my lap. "For what exactly?" I asked, my tone controlled. "For what was said at the wedding, for what wasn't corrected." She slid a cup toward me. "I raised Emma better than that, I will admit." I was startled, and I should have spoken up then. I studied her face. She wasn't the sort of woman who gave apologies easily. Every line in her expression spoke of a lifetime of authority, of being obeyed. "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked. "Because," she said, leaning forward slightly, "you deserve to know that not all of us in Emma's family see you as an inconvenience. And because I believe what she said came from ignorance, not cruelty. She knows very little of Michael's life before his father passed. I suspect she thought she was being amusing." The word made something in me tighten. I had been the punchline in front of my own son's friends and family. "I appreciate the apology," I said slowly, "but I can't pretend it didn't do damage. Not just to me, but to Michael's view of me." Margaret's gaze didn't waver. "Then perhaps we can work together to undo that damage." Her words surprised me. I hadn't expected an ally, especially not one from Emma's own family. She went on, explaining that she had seen the shift in Michael's expression that night, the way he had looked torn between his bride and his mother. She said she believed Emma had been influenced by her own mother, a woman Margaret described with a faint edge of disapproval, and that she feared this marriage might become a wedge between Michael and me if no one intervened. I left that meeting with more questions than answers, but also with a strange, reluctant hope. Margaret had promised to speak with Emma, to make her understand the weight of her words. She had also hinted at inviting me to a small family gathering, one separate from Emma's parents, where I might reconnect with Michael without tension hanging in the air. Driving home, I wasn't sure if I was being pulled into something more complicated than I could handle, but for the first time since the wedding, I felt like maybe, just maybe, I wasn't entirely alone in this fight for my place in my son's life. Little did I know, the next step would not come from Margaret's quiet influence, but from an unexpected message I would receive that night, and that message would change the shape of everything. The morning after the dinner confrontation, I woke up feeling as if I had been dragged through a storm. My head was heavy, my eyes puffy from crying, and my heart ached in that deep, pulsing way that made breathing an effort. I lay there staring at the ceiling, listening to the faint sounds of the city outside. The world had not stopped spinning, though I half expected it to. My own world had shifted so dramatically. I could not believe the sun still rose, that people still walked dogs, that traffic still buzzed down the street. I had planned to take the day slowly. The wedding was just a day away. I knew that whatever I felt, however bruised I was inside, I had to be composed. My presence would already be under scrutiny from the bride's family, and possibly from her friends. I could not give them another reason to whisper, but as I sat up in bed and reached for the glass of water on the nightstand, my phone vibrated. It was a message from Michael. "Mom, can we meet alone today?" "No, Anna, no one else." Just a stop. My chest tightened. I did not know if this was an olive branch or a summons to another kind of emotional ambush. But he was my son. If he wanted to talk, I would be there. I replied with a simple yes. "Where and when?" and waited. His answer came quickly. "Coffee shop near the park, noon." It was a neutral choice. Public enough to keep voices calm, private enough that we could have a real conversation. I closed my eyes and tried to steady my breathing. I would go, but I needed to walk in with clarity, not with the tangled, raw anger of last night. By noon, I was sitting in the corner of the coffee shop, my hands wrapped around a mug of tea. The rain from earlier that morning had left the streets damp, and the air inside smelled of fresh coffee and pastries. Michael arrived a few minutes late, his hair slightly tousled, wearing a dark blue sweater I had bought him years ago. I wondered if that was intentional, if he knew I would notice. He sat down across from me, avoiding my eyes at first. For a moment, we both just stared at our drinks. The silence was almost unbearable. "Mom," he began quietly, "I owe you an apology. What Anna said last night, it was wrong, completely wrong." She was out of line. A wave of relief swept over me, but I kept my voice steady. Thank you for saying that. It hurt, Michael, more than you know. I know, he said quickly. I talked to her about it after you left. She doesn't see you the way I do. She doesn't understand the history, the years. What you went through raising me after Dad died. My throat tightened. She doesn't have to understand all of it. But she does have to respect me. I'm your mother. That doesn't change because she decides to rewrite the story. He nodded, but I could see tension in his jaw. She thinks the way she introduced you was more comfortable for her family. She said it was about avoiding questions. I let out a slow breath. Comfortable for her, maybe, but humiliating for me. Do you understand the difference? He looked away, his fingers tapping the side of his cup. Yes, I do, but Mom, I need you to know, she's nervous about the wedding. There's been so much pressure from her parents, and she's trying to keep the peace. A sharp pang went through me. Michael, keeping the peace should not mean sacrificing the truth, and it certainly shouldn't mean diminishing me. For the first time, his eyes met mine fully, and I saw the boy I had raised, the boy who used to cling to my hand when crossing the street, the boy who cried on the first day of school and whispered that he didn't want me to leave. I'm sorry, he said again. You didn't deserve that. I told her she owes you an apology, and will I get one? I asked quietly. He hesitated. She isn't ready. She thinks you might not accept it. I almost laughed at the absurdity. Not ready. She's marrying my son tomorrow. She should be ready to show me basic respect. The words hung in the air between us. He looked uncomfortable, shifting in his seat, and I knew there was more he wasn't saying. I decided not to press. I could see he was torn, caught between loyalty to me and to the woman he was about to marry. We talked for a while longer, but the conversation never quite found its way to easy ground. When we parted, he hugged me tightly, and for a moment, I thought maybe we would be all right, but as I walked away, I couldn't shake the sense that the storm had only paused, not passed, that night. I stayed in my hotel room, looking out over the city lights. I thought about the years I had spent building a life for Michael after his father's death, the nights I went without sleep when he was sick, the times I worked extra hours to afford his school trips, the countless ways I had poured myself into being his mother, and tomorrow, I would sit in a room full of people, some of whom believed I was merely his late father's ex. I closed my eyes and told myself to be strong tomorrow. I would hold my head high tomorrow. I would remember exactly who I was. I sat at my table, the low hum of clinking glasses and murmured conversations swirling around me like a storm I couldn't escape. The grand chandelier overhead spilled golden light onto every corner of the room, making the scene feel more like a royal banquet than a wedding reception. My son, Daniel, sat at the head table beside his bride, Lucy, their fingers loosely entwined. He was smiling, but there was a stiffness in his posture I had not seen before. I could not tell if it was nerves, pride, or the residue of the tension from earlier. Dinner had ended, and the master of ceremonies, a man with a booming voice and a permanent smile, tapped his microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, he announced, it's time for speeches. Let's hear from the people who know our bride and groom best. The room erupted in polite applause. I sat up straighter. I had been told by Daniel himself that I would speak tonight. I had rehearsed my words for weeks, choosing every sentence carefully so that they wouldn't embarrass him or seem overly sentimental. I wanted to share moments from his childhood. Memories of his first steps, his first scraped knee, his first school play. I wanted to remind him of the quiet evenings when it was just the two of us, curled up on the couch with popcorn and a movie. Long before life got complicated, but then I heard it first. We'd like to invite the bride's mother to say a few words. I blinked, my breath catching for a moment. Lucy's mother, a tall, elegant woman in a midnight blue gown, rose with practiced grace and walked toward the microphone. The applause swelled again. I tried to shake off the feeling of unease. Perhaps they were just starting with her. Surely, I was next. Her speech was charming, full of little anecdotes about Lucy's childhood, her first ballet recital, her teenage misadventures. She spoke about how proud she was of her daughter and how grateful she was to welcome Daniel into their family. Every word was smooth, well-crafted, and warmly delivered. People laughed at her jokes, nodded in recognition at her heartfelt moments, and clapped enthusiastically when she finished. I sat there, palms resting on the tablecloth, waiting for my turn, and now, the MC said, a few words from the best man. I froze. The best man bounded up to the microphone and began his speech, a mix of humor and nostalgia from his years of friendship with Daniel. It was light, playful, and the room loved it. But with every sentence, my chest grew tighter. After the best man came the maid of honor, then Lucy herself, thanking guests for coming, speaking about how blessed she felt. Then Daniel took the microphone to say a few words of his own. Still, my name was never called. I realized, as he thanked both families for everything they had done, that he was moving toward the end of the speeches. I stared at him, searching for his eyes, silently urging him to acknowledge me. He didn't. When he said, "Now let's enjoy the rest of the evening," and the music started up again, it was like a door had been slammed in my face. My chance to speak, my one public moment to remind him and everyone else that I was more than some distant guest, was gone. I sat there, smiling faintly, clapping politely, while my heart thudded heavily in my chest. I had been erased, again. It wasn't just about the speech. It was about the accumulation of slights, the growing pattern I had tried to ignore, being left out of planning meetings, not being introduced to important people in his life, being asked to sit in the second row during the ceremony, and now, this. I reached for my wine glass, my hand trembling slightly. Lucy's eyes flicked toward me for the briefest moment, her lips curving into what might have been a smirk, or maybe I imagined it. Daniel came over a few minutes later, leaning down to hug me. "You having a good time, Mom?" he asked. I wanted to ask why I hadn't been called up. I wanted to demand an answer, but the weight of the moment crushed my voice. Instead, I simply said, "Yes, it's lovely," and watched him walk away again. Inside, though, I made a quiet promise to myself: if my words were not welcome here, I would keep them. But I would also remember every moment of this day, not for the flowers or the music or the cake, but for what it revealed about where I stood in my own son's life. And I would decide, in my own time, what that meant for us going forward. The band began to play, couples moved to the dance floor, and laughter filled the air. But at my table, I sat in silence, my fork tracing circles on my plate, thinking of all the things I had been ready to say and all the reasons I would never say them now. The morning after the confrontation at the hotel, I woke before the sun. My body was exhausted, but my mind felt like it had been marching through a battlefield all night. My chest was heavy, not from the weight of sleep but from the burden of knowing that my own son had stood by and let his bride humiliate me in front of strangers. I sat at the edge of the bed in my small rented room, hands clasped together so tightly that my knuckles were white. I thought about the wedding, the speeches, the laughter that had not included me, the way her eyes had sliced through me when she called me his late father's ex. Those words kept replaying like an ugly refrain in my head. No matter how I tried to reason with myself, no matter how many times I told myself that people say foolish things in moments of stress, I could not erase the sting. I poured myself a cup of the weak hotel coffee, but it did nothing to warm me. I looked out the window at the city below, at people walking briskly to wherever they belonged. Belonging. That word felt like a cruel joke now. Where did I belong if not in my own son's life? I had been his anchor, his safe harbor, the one who taught him to walk, to speak, to stand tall. And yet here I was, reduced to a footnote in his new life, someone to be tolerated rather than embraced. By mid-morning, I decided I could not sit in this room and wallow. I needed air, space. A place where the walls did not feel like they were pressing in on me. I took my coat and went outside, walking without any particular direction. The streets were lined with little cafes and flower shops. A vendor was selling fresh bread, the smell reminding me of the mornings I used to bake for Michael when he was a boy. I would wake early on weekends just to surprise him with warm rolls, the kind his father used to love. We would eat together at the kitchen table, sunlight streaming in, his little legs swinging beneath the chair. Those mornings had felt simple and pure. There had been no bitterness then, no question about whether I was loved or wanted. I had been his whole world. Somewhere along the way, the world had shifted, and I had been left behind. I ended up at a park. The air was crisp, and leaves crunched beneath my feet as I walked. I sat on a bench near the pond, watching ducks glide across the water. An elderly couple passed by, holding hands, their heads bent toward each other in quiet conversation. I envied them, not because they were together, but because they clearly still mattered to each other. I pulled my phone from my bag and stared at it. My thumb hovered over Michael's name. Part of me wanted to call and demand an explanation. Another part of me feared what he might say. I had already been wounded enough. Could I take more? The truth was, I was not afraid of his words, I was afraid of his silence. Eventually, I decided I needed to go back to my room and pack. Staying in this city felt suffocating. My plan was to head home quietly, without telling anyone. I would disappear from the wedding chaos and let them have their perfect little world without me in it. But as I was walking back, I passed a small antique shop. In the window was a wooden music box, carved with intricate flowers. Something about it stopped me. Michael had loved music boxes as a child. He had one shaped like a carousel that played a soft lullaby when you wound it. He would listen to it before bed, eyes closing as the tiny horses turned. I went inside and asked the shopkeeper about the music box. He told me it was French from the 1920s, and that it still worked perfectly. I wound it gently, and a delicate tune filled the air. It was not the same as Michael's childhood box, but it was close enough to bring tears to my eyes. Without thinking too much, I bought it, tucking it carefully into my bag. Maybe I would give it to him. Maybe I would leave it at his door with a note, or maybe it would just sit in my home, a reminder of the boy he used to be. When I returned to the hotel, I found an envelope slipped under my door. My heart pounded as I bent to pick it up. It was from Michael. My hands trembled as I tore it open. Inside was a folded piece of paper. His handwriting was neat, just like when he was in school. Mom, I'm sorry for yesterday. I know things got out of hand. Please understand that Jessica was nervous and didn't mean what she said. I should have spoken up, but I didn't want to make a scene. I hope you'll come to the family brunch tomorrow before we leave for the honeymoon. I sat on the bed, reading the note over and over. There was no mention of love, no deep apology, just an explanation dressed as an excuse. Still, part of me clung to the word sorry as though it were a lifeline. That night, I lay awake thinking about whether to go to the brunch. My pride told me to decline, to let him see what it felt like to be excluded. My heart told me to go, because despite everything, he was still my son. In the end, my heart won. The next morning, I dressed in a soft blue blouse and black skirt. I pinned my hair neatly and slipped the music box into my bag. The brunch was held at a garden cafe. Tables set with white cloths and small vases of roses. Michael saw me as I arrived, and gave a quick wave. Jessica was beside him, smiling politely, as though nothing had happened. I took a seat at the far end of the table, trying to focus on the food rather than the tension in the air. People chatted around me, passing platters of fruit and pastries. Michael eventually came over and sat beside me. Thanks for coming, Mom, he said softly. I almost didn't, I replied, my voice calm but steady. His eyes darted to my bag. What's that? I pulled out the music box and placed it on the table. Something that reminded me of you, I said. When you were little. He wound it, and the melody filled the air. For a moment, his face softened. The man disappearing, and the boy I once knew returning. He smiled faintly. I remember my old carousel. Yes, I said. You loved it. You would fall asleep to it every night. The moment passed quickly, swallowed by the chatter around us, but it was enough to remind me that somewhere deep inside, my son still existed. Whether he would choose to let me be part of his life again was a question that remained unanswered. When the brunch ended, Michael hugged me briefly. We'll talk when we get back from the honeymoon, he said. I walked away without looking back, holding the image of that fleeting smile in my mind. It was not forgiveness, it was not healing, but it was a crack in the wall that had been built between us, and for now, that was all I had. I woke with the kind of headache that had nothing to do with wine and everything to do with heartbreak. My hotel room was quiet, save for the soft hum of the air conditioning, but my mind was anything but still. Images from the night before flashed uninvited. Emma's cold smile, the murmured whispers, my son's silence. I had stood in that room, like an intruder at my own child's wedding. The words his late father's ex still rang in my ears, twisting the knife in ways I had not known were possible. For a moment, I considered pulling the covers over my head and letting the day pass me by, but that was not me. I was not the kind of woman who hid when life turned cruel. I sat up slowly, my body heavy, and walked to the window. The morning sun had painted the city in gold, indifferent to the human dramas playing out below. People were already bustling along the sidewalks, coffee cups in hand. Heading toward their own plans, I wondered if any of them had ever felt as displaced in their own family as I did now. I made myself a cup of coffee from the machine on the counter, the bitter scent filling the small room. My hands wrapped around the warm ceramic as if it could steady me. I thought about what I should do next. Last night, I had left without saying goodbye to anyone, my heels clicking against the pavement as I walked back to the hotel in the cold night air. I had not cried then. My anger had been a shield, protecting me from the full weight of humiliation. But in the quiet of this morning, the tears finally came, slow at first, then rushing as if they had been waiting all night to escape. I sat by the window, staring out at the street below, and let them fall. My son was married now, and I had been treated as though I was a stranger from a past life, rather than the woman who had raised him, loved him, and stood by him through every scraped knee, broken bone, and late-night fever. How had we gotten here? I thought back to the years after his father's death. I had been both mother and father, disciplinarian and comforter. I had worked long hours, packed lunches, attended every school play, and listened to his dreams about becoming an engineer. I had cheered him on through every challenge. I had believed that one day, all the sacrifices would mean something, that our bond would be unbreakable. Last night proved I had been wrong. My phone buzzed on the nightstand. For a heartbeat, I let myself hope it was Daniel, ready to apologize, ready to acknowledge the pain his bride had caused. But when I looked, it was a text from an old friend in town, just checking in. I typed a quick reply, but the ache in my chest deepened. My own son had not called. I showered and dressed, forcing myself into clothes that made me feel like I still had control, a soft blue dress, a cardigan, and low heels, nothing extravagant, just enough to remind myself that I was not broken beyond repair. I decided I would take a walk to clear my head. The city had always been a place where I could get lost in the rhythm of strangers, and right now, I needed that anonymity. As I walked through the bustling streets, I passed couples holding hands, families laughing together, street musicians playing songs that carried through the warm air. Life went on for everyone else, and touched by my quiet disaster, I stopped at a small park and sat on a bench under a tree, watching children play. Their laughter was bright, uncomplicated. And it made me think of Daniel when he was little. Back then, we had been a team. I was lost in thought when I heard a familiar voice. Mom, I turned, and there he was, my son, standing just a few feet away. His hair was slightly mussed, his tie loosened, as if he had been in a rush. My heart leapt. But I forced myself to stay still. Daniel, I said, my voice more steady than I felt. He sat down beside me, his shoulders tense. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The sound of children playing filled the space between us. I came to find you, he finally said. You left last night without saying anything. I looked at him, searching his face for any sign of understanding. What was I supposed to say? Daniel, your wife introduced me to strangers as your late father's ex. Do you know how that felt? His jaw tightened. She didn't mean it like that. She was nervous. I let out a slow breath. Daniel, that was not nervousness. That was deliberate. She wanted to diminish me, to erase my place in your life, and you let it happen. He turned to look at me, his eyes clouded. I didn't know how to react. It all happened so fast. I thought it would be better to let it go in the moment. Better for who? I asked. Because it wasn't better for me. I have spent your whole life loving you, supporting you, and standing by you, and last night, I was treated like I was nothing. He rubbed his hands together, his voice quieter. Now, I'm sorry, I really am. I should have said something, but Emma, she has her own ideas about family. She doesn't understand everything we've been through. That's because you haven't told her. I said you haven't made it clear who I am and what I mean to you. And now she thinks she can rewrite our history. For a long moment, he didn't respond. Then he said, I'll talk to her. I wanted to believe him, but trust, once cracked, is hard to repair. I hope you do, because if she keeps treating me like this, I won't be around to watch it happen. He looked at me, then truly looked, and I saw the boy he used to be. I don't want to lose you, Mom. I nodded, feeling the sting of fresh tears. Then don't let it happen. We sat there for a while, neither of us speaking, just watching the children run across the grass. It wasn't a resolution, but it was a beginning. When I finally stood to leave, Daniel hugged me, and for the first time since I arrived in the city, I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe we could rebuild. Maybe the damage wasn't permanent, but deep down, I knew it would take more than words to heal what had been broken. Back at the hotel, I took off my cardigan and sat on the bed. The ache was still there, but so was a quiet determination. I had weathered worse storms in my life, and I would weather this one too, whether my son and his new wife understood it or not. I was still his mother, and that was something no one could erase.